High fly ball into right field. She is gone. In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. This one by Mattingly. Oh, hang on to the roof. Goodbye, home run. Mattingly. Tuck waits one. Deep left field. Down the line. That ball is out of here. Out of here.
Welcome back to another episode of Table Setters, covering all things Major League Baseball. As always, I'm Steve, joined by my tag team partner, Devin. What's going on, man?
What's going on? It is division preview season here. We are just weeks away, and we're diving into each division, one episode per division. Exciting 2 weeks here at Table Setters. I can't believe we're here already, but we are. So let's get it going here. The National League West. I'll give you this fact. The National League West has had a team made it to the World Series 8 of the last 15 seasons. 5 of those times they won it all. So it kind of seems if you can make some noise in the NL West, you have a decent shot at being the team that represents the National League in the World Series. Who that will be this year, I think some people, 99.9% of people, have a guess that is the same, but we're going to talk about it in depth tonight.
Of course, we'll talk about the history of the NOS, and you mentioned before about some of that awesome nugget of information that goes a long way in making our decisions, but the National League West has long been dominated by the aforementioned Los Angeles Dodgers. They've clinched 11 of the last 12 divisions since 2013. As we approach this 2025 season, what do you know, Devin? The Dodgers are once again favored to lead that division and represent the NL West deep into the playoffs and some supremacy on their end. But as you mentioned before, we're doing these previews, and I hope you guys are in for the ride because we have about 2 weeks of content coming out to you every single day here on Table Setters. You can follow us at Table Setters Pod on IG and on the X Machine for all your updates. We're starting today, as Devin mentioned, with the National League West, followed by tomorrow with the American League West, and moving on right through the schedule.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see, where we are. You and I, we haven't really talked before this about like, oh, what are you thinking? What am I thinking? So we might have some of the same thoughts and opinions. We may have some different ones, but we're gonna dive into it. So let's start by just kind of looking at each team quickly and kind of going through what we like and what we dislike, what we thought of the offseason as well. We have to start with the Dodgers, man. The aforementioned Dodgers. Like, how else could you start? So I'm gonna tell you what I think here. The offseason, I'll use one word. Ruthless. And if I want to go to 2, as wrestling fans, ruthless aggression. Like, they just continue to double down on what they do. We've spent the offseason kind of, debating, is it good for baseball, bad for baseball? Should we whine about it? Should we just get over it? Now it's time to actually get over that part and look at the roster. Here's what sticks out to me, man. Like, this team won the World Series in 5 games against the New York Yankees, who were a pretty damn good baseball team themselves. And they are so much better, at least on paper right now. I mean, Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman at the top, Teoscar right there as well, Max Muncy, Will Smith, like that. You go through the first 6, and that's just incredible. So as far as looking at this team, a couple things stand out that I'm looking for. Obviously, they're trying to repeat. That's not easy in baseball. I'm curious what Shohei's pitching role is going to be. I don't know. I think Dave Roberts kind of alluded to maybe May sometime. But if I start off with a bold prediction here, I think at some point in the season, he becomes maybe not their closer, but a Swiss Army knife bullpen piece. And how that looks, I don't know yet. But I feel like there's an inkling in the Dodgers front office and coaching staff that already knows we're going to use this guy differently than maybe some people think. Maybe not a full-blown starter. I could be dead wrong. I just have this gut feeling about that. So your thoughts initially, I have a couple more, but I want to hear what you think about the Dodgers. What stands out to you?
I mean, the offseason you mentioned was ruthless. It was nonstop. It was on top of being rich. They became richer, and the formidable lineup now. You can go through the 1 through 9. It's incredible, probably the best in baseball, but their rotation is equally impressive at this point. The addition of Roki Sasaki, what we're going to get for him, and you got Blake Snell, of course, the 2-time Cy Young winner, and then the bullpen as well. What they did over there in the bullpen, rich get richer, and the conversations as we all sit here and want to wax poetic about what's good for baseball and what's bad for baseball, we ask ourselves the question, and we're doing this for all these division previews, all these teams, are they trying to win? And the Dodgers are the best example of doing that. They're aggressive. They don't want to rest in their laurels. Of course, if they were to go in their season stood pat, on where they were. They are the defending champions. They probably would be the favorite going into the season as far as not just the NL West, but for the National League in general. But they went out there underscoring their commitment to maintaining their status as powerhouse and not taking anything for granted. So you have to at least appreciate that from the perspective of an objective point of view.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I got to say, man, like one guy I think is going to have a huge season on this roster that maybe not everyone's talking about is Tommy Edman. I thought that re-sign, not just kind of taking it in stride where they got him at the deadline and just kind of called a day, let him go. No, they re-upped. And this is such a Dodger player, though, that kind of annoying guy that you add to the powerhouse that can play defense, multiple positions, and hit pretty freaking well, too. He was great in the postseason, killed the Metsies. So, yeah, Tommy Edman, man, I think you're going to look up and see a hell of a season from him, even if he's at the bottom of the lineup or towards the bottom of the lineup. The rotation is pretty fascinating, man. Like Blake Snell, I think, may have the best year out of all these guys. Tyler Glasnow is interesting. Remember, he had some elbow stuff last year. We just are getting this news about Garrett Cole, and he had elbow stuff last year that lingered and started, and now we see how it's ending. So you got to wonder about Glasnow. He's looked good in spring training, looks like himself, but it's very rare for this guy to make more than, I don't know, low 20s starts. So I think LA, that's the one thing. I think people are wondering now, what would have to happen to derail the Dodgers a little bit where they don't win the division? And even if they don't win the division and have some things derail them, they still probably find a way to make the playoffs because of how deep they are. But the answer to that question, I think, is a few things. I think maybe Shohei, this is not a prediction. This is what I think would happen to get them down a little bit. I think Shohei would have to have a season that was, on his standards, considered a little bit of a disappointment. And that might be the kind of season where for 90% of players, it's a great season. But for him, it's just, he regresses a little bit from last year. Last year was ridiculous. Don't forget, like, injury kind of things. He had the shoulder in the playoffs. Looks good in spring training, but you never know if something like that lingers. So I think that would be number one. I think maybe Freddie's ankle would have to kind of flare back up, something like that. And these are not things I'm wishing upon them, just to make that clear. And I think this is the biggest question, and I think maybe the most realistic, is injuries in the rotation. And you know what? We've seen that before in LA. And I said this before, if they have another season of that, then the story of like, man, what are they doing with these pitchers? That's going to become bigger, and maybe other guys don't want to sign as badly as some of these guys recently have wanted to. And as far as what they do with Roki, they have the ability to be safe with him. They have the ability to be safe with Ohtani as well. Like I said, maybe using him as some kind of Swiss Army knife. Kershaw, whatever they can get out of him, they get out of him. They have so many guys coming back. Dustin May just said he really wants to be a starter. Is there a spot? Will there eventually be? Like, they just go and go and go, which is why I just don't understand how anyone could think that, they're not going to be kind of back at the top of that division. But there is a scenario where injuries and maybe performances that are a little lackluster take them down. We saw it with the Rangers last year. They had several people in that lineup just not live up to their standards. So there is a world where that happens.
Yeah, and I agree with the weakness part, because that's the one thing you can pinpoint of their ability to manage player health has been under scrutiny for sure, especially in the rotation. And there's also the question of integrating some new acquisitions in seamlessly, because there's always that thing, because the Dodgers have been very much based on culture, and they acclimated all these stars really well. And anytime you bring in superstars, which they have in the offseason, Blake Snell is a superstar in his own right. So it has to be acclimated. I'm not saying there's going to be issues with that, but if you're trying to find weaknesses on the board, you have to sort of make them up in a way. And I think a big piece of that, namely, I think the biggest piece is going to be managing the injuries, because we saw it last year. They limped into the playoffs and they somehow made do with the deep run that they had. And like we talked about before, if they would have went in as the team they were in 2024, we would still be looking at the Dodgers as the favorite, but they would look like a completely different team if they were healthy. And that's the scary part for the rest of the league. And now on top of that, they're not only healthy, but they got better in all facets of the game. You mentioned Tommy Edman. I think he's going to be such a big piece to what they do. He's a Swiss Army knife type of player. He's a pest. He's one of those guys that you love him. He's on your team. If he's on the other team, he's tearing up the base paths and he's making you very, very angry as another fan. I think the Dodgers right now, a lot would have to go wrong for them to not just dominate and win the division by double digits. Like, I think that's where we're looking at this point. And that's not for the other NL West fans out here that are listening. Hey, I'm a D-backs fan. I'm a Padres fan. We have a lot of good things to say about those teams as well. And with the expanded playoffs, there is an opportunity for, the Dodgers may win the NL West going away, but that does not mean that they will be representing the National League in the World Series ultimately, because we know it's a crapshoot. And sometimes baseball, the best team doesn't get represented in the World Series. Last year happened to be the case, but more years than not, Devin, as we see. That's usually not the case. We see the Dodgers kind of they stub their toes somewhere along the way. Last year was the exception, not really the rule.
100%. You never know what happens, but they should be better, which is scary. And I would think they'd be healthier too, which is also scary, like you said. Let's move to the Diamondbacks. We'll talk about the Dodgers again as we get towards the end of the episode. But I want to talk about the Diamondbacks here. I love what they did in the offseason. Obviously, their lineup is pretty much intact. That's how I would say it. I know they lost Christian Walker, but to immediately pivot and go acquire Josh Naylor, who is a proven commodity in baseball, different hitter than Christian Walker for sure. Definitely a different fielder. You know, you might not get that slick glove that Christian Walker has down there, but I love the Naylor acquisition, just getting someone that's proven, right? Not trying to fill the hole some other way. So the lineup is intact, and Corbin Burnes is at the top of that rotation. Zach Gallen is right there as well, which makes it seem like, you know, those two have the opportunity to be one of, if not the best 1-2 punch at the top of the rotation, right? You have Merrill Kelly and Eduardo Rodriguez, two guys that are proven veteran pitchers, maybe not super sexy, but if they're healthy, they know how to go out there and get it done and give you innings. The guy I find fascinating and maybe becomes a little bit of an X factor for this team and how far they go is a Brandon Pfaadt. I mean, he's a guy who, you know, he's had some big moments. The numbers are not always impressive, but one thing that jumps out is I think he's been a little bit unlucky. So, like, you could look up and he could have a much better year than you expect. His ERA was 4.71 last year, but the expected ERA was 3.78. Like, that's a lot of bad luck there. So you have to look at that. So for me, I mean, I think a lot of it as far as strengths, rotation, and lineup are both strengths. They are that nagging, annoying team that could be a thorn in the side of a powerhouse like the Los Angeles Dodgers, and they've done it to them before, right? 2023 was not that long ago where they eliminated them. Corbin Carroll, I want to see him get off to a fast start this year because we know we spent a lot of episodes on here last year wondering what's wrong with this dude. Is his shoulder still messed up? And then obviously second half, he turned it on and looked like himself. He's looked good in spring training as well. We talked about 1-2 punch with the pitchers. Gallen, who should be motivated as a impending free agent after this year, and Corbin Burnes. But Corbin Carroll and Ketel Marte, talk about 1-2 punch, man. I mean, it might not get better than those two. So you got to love that. I think that World Series year, their bullpen did so much work for them. And you got to wonder what the bullpen is such for every team is such a unpredictable part of a team, even if it's the same dudes from the last year. So you kind of look there and you wonder, is that going to be the X factor as far as the three parts, bullpen, starting pitching, and lineup? You got to say that's the obvious choice. But I love what I see from these guys for sure. I know they fell short of the playoffs last year, but I still love them coming back this year. They should be super motivated, chip on their shoulder.
Yeah, and I agree with the Arizona's aggressive spending. I think that they are very much committed to closing the gap with the Dodgers, even if it's not going to be this year. They know that in a 5-game series, 7-game series, I think that they know that they can dominate the Dodgers if all things fall into place. And you mentioned before, while the rotation has improved, I think the bullpen enhancements are going to be necessary if they're going to have a comprehensive postseason push down the line. If you look at the Roto Champ bullpen prospective 40-man roster, Justin Martinez is slotted in for the projected closer. AJ Puck is also there as well. So you'd want an improvement on that. And I think at the deadline, we're going to be talking about that as well. But if they're in contention, I expect them to be buyers because we saw them be aggressive. They threw the money at Corbin Burnes, as you mentioned, 6 years, $210 million. They have a lineup that is potent. Corbin Carroll, 2023 Rookie of the Year, Ketel Marte. And the lineup itself, you mentioned Josh Naylor. I mean, you're giving up some defense with Christian Walker leaving, but Naylor himself, to me, is more dynamic of a bat, and I like what Naylor brings to the table in that ballpark. So I think that if there is a threat in a world where everything crumbles down on the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks would be there holding maybe their hands out to catch and be the team that can make the jump. But I think the divide right now is so big between the Dodgers and the next team up. But that's not to say the Diamondbacks can't just hold serve and get to the playoffs. You know what I mean? So as you mentioned, 2023, there's a recent history. There's a bugaboo that the D-backs standing across the field from the Dodgers, if they find themselves in a position where they are going to play the Dodgers in a big series to advance past them, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that would probably pick the Diamondbacks just because of recent history and the familiarity. I don't know, just because the Dodgers won the World Series last year, that stink is completely off them. And I'm not sure if you agree with that. I think they had a lot to overcome with the shortened season, winning the World Series. but there's something about when you face another team, there's something about the Dodgers in a big series that people will always pick against them, whether it's right or wrong, whether it's based in reason or not. I think the Diamondbacks are one of those teams that will always feel like they have the bigger team's number. They're a pest of a team. I feel like that is a derogatory term, but I'm using it in a loving way. I think the D-backs are out there and they grind teams to death. And last year, similar to the Texas Rangers that we will preview tomorrow when you guys listen, they're a team that, maybe there's a little bit of a hangover. I know they didn't win the World Series, but they got there, made a magical run, and everything that the magic carpet ride, there was one team standing tall, but the D-backs were just as magical that year as the Texas Rangers. So I think there was a little bit of a hangover.
Yeah, and you mentioned the trade deadline and what could happen there with the Diamondbacks and maybe add to the bullpen. I do think if I had to sit here and predict right now, and it's tough because you don't know who's getting hurt and what needs these teams are going to have in July, but all things being said right now, if I had to choose one team in the NL West that'll be the most aggressive at the deadline, I think it's the Diamondbacks. And I know the Dodgers are always aggressive because they have so many expendable pieces they can move. But if they're healthy, they don't need to make a move, right? It's almost like gluttony at that point. Will they make a move if some injuries affect them? Certainly, just like they did last year acquiring Jack Flaherty. But if they're healthy, I don't think they need to do much. And I think the Diamondbacks have shown for the last couple of years, they'll be aggressive and give their roster what they need. The bullpen, which is, by the way, like Justin Martinez, by all means, could be a future star. Like he's shown glimpses
100%.
of that. So nasty. AJ Puck has had his moments of being very, very good. Kevin Ginkel has been a stud at times there. So like you can go on and on. There's things to like for sure. But if we're picking one part of the team to pick apart, that might be the team. I will say the Diamondbacks, like every other team in baseball, just don't have the room for error or the room for injury, I think, that the Dodgers do. If some of their big guys get hurt, it's harder to replace. I wonder what role Jordan Lawler plays. Like this guy was on the World Series roster in 2023, and now he's had some injury bugs, and they just re-upped Perdomo, and now you got to wonder, like, what's the spot for Jordan Lawler? I don't know. But to go to the next team, I guess let's talk about the Padres. I mean, which way to go with these guys? The Padres, early on in the offseason, maybe not even early on, more than halfway through the offseason, you're kind of like, it's been a rough offseason for the Padres, missed out on Roki, kind of rumors about getting rid of guys. Just Joe Musgrove's not going to be there this year because of injury and on and on. But then you look up at the roster, Luis Arias, Manny Machado, Fernando Tatis Jr., Jackson Merrill, like, oh, that's pretty good. And then you look at the rotation, and they have some studs up there in the rotation as well. I'm confused by them. I think they're in this scenario now where if they're within shouting distance of a playoff spot and or the Dodgers near the deadline, I don't see them being aggressive trying to acquire anybody, but I think they stand pat. But if they're not too close or not close enough, I think a Dylan Cease is traded because there's been rumors all the time, and people are going to throw stuff at them that want a rotation member, a pitcher, right? I think if Sandy Alcantara's still out there, people are going to throw stuff at the Marlins as long as he's looked good. And the same with Dylan Cease. Like Dylan Cease has thrown a ton of innings the last several years. He's dependable. He's going to go out there every fifth day. Even if he's just has a few months left on his contract, someone's going to want to go get him. But I don't know what to make of the Padres right now. I think they're a super talented team. I think that stadium is electric and gives them energy. I think they do have a chip on their shoulder, especially after the way they were eliminated last year, after it looking like they were going to get rid of the Dodgers again. I think they're a team that needs to get off to a really, really hot start. That's what I'll say. That looking at them right now, you need to get them on a roll in April.
Yeah, and with the Padres having that relatively quiet offseason, at least comparatively in the division, with the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers doing everything they did, they're focused on internal development with their team. They have their core roster, as you mentioned, because you forget sometimes because they've been there that you forget. Like sometimes, you don't have to make acquisitions, have a lineup that is potent, but the inconsistency with the ownership thing, the questions that are out there, and the conservative offseason approach, they have questions about where they will be competitive wise. While the Diamondbacks are looking to hold serve with the D-backs are looking to hold serve with the Dodgers. The Padres are looking like maybe there's a question about what is next for them. And then you mentioned before with the rotation led by Dylan Cease and of course, Michael King among the league's best, there is a question that when they are going to be approached at the deadline, that will certainly dictate their strategy about how far back they are. They could be light buyers, as you mentioned. I do not think they're going to go out there and mortgage the future in any way to do anything like, crazy in the at the trade deadline, or to try to unrealistically try to catch the Dodgers. But if they are any sniff of not being competitive at any way, they're going to be sellers. Absolutely. If they're underperforming and at any blink, and they kind of have to be, and that's the smart thing to do. I understand baseball fans don't want to buy into that, especially with the expanded playoffs, that, as I mentioned before, the magic of these matchups, you don't know what's going to happen with the familiarity, that all of a sudden you have the Padres match against the Dodgers. What's last year it came within a few at bats for the Padres not to advance past the Dodgers. We know how quick it happens, but at the same time, you have to be able to see the bigger picture here. And Dylan Cease being traded for a large haul at the trade deadline. That's kind of why you didn't do it here in the offseason, because you're going to have a team that's desperate for a frontline starter that's trying to make a playoff push. And I'm looking at you, Baltimore. Like, I think that is a perfect match for a trade here, where Dylan Cease could be moved on and the Padres could expedite this rebuild and be in a spot where you have some affordable talent. And then you can start it there before and add on top of the players that are already there, because Manny Machado is 1 year older. That poses challenges, of course. And Fernando Tatis Jr. is electric. You want to be able to provide stuff around him as well for the rest of the team to grow. But I think for the Padres, this is one of those years that it's going to be a transition for them to find an identity where they are, because they're not the identity that they were 3 years ago. And I think that's just because ownership has shifted.
For sure. The ownership question is a big one. I will say AJ Preller, man, he even with the new ownership seems to know how to get fans on his side. Also of note, like, still a very good bullpen. Jason Adam, who was acquired last year, is still there. Robert Suarez has been very good at the back end of the bullpen. Maybe not the super bullpen they had at the end of, or the second half of last year when Tanner Scott was there. And it doesn't help that not only did you lose Tanner Scott, you lost him to your arch rival. So that kind of stinks.
Not sleep on Jeremiah Estrada as well. That guy has electric stuff as well in the bullpen. I think he's someone who can challenge that setup role in big spots. But I think the way bullpens are utilized, we watched it last year with the Yankees, that it's just about the leverage spots. And I think you're going to see Jason Madden and Estrada. And Suarez is the closer going away from what we saw from him. But I think the bullpen has potential to be pretty damn good at the back end. But there's a little bit of depth in between for, there's other outs to get if your starters don't go 6 or 7, which we know that doesn't happen often in MLB anymore.
Yeah, a Padres path to a division crown, a surprising division crown, would be Cease and Michael King just being electric all year, and an MVP type of year from Fernando Tatis Jr., where he plays 162. That is their path, in my eyes, to a unlikely division title. So you never know. Those
that
two
be
things,
so much fun, though? I mean,
it would be fantastic. And they do have I think they have the attitude and the mindset to surprise people. Manny Machado, he's played with a chip on his shoulder from day one. Fernando Tatis Jr., kind of a DGAF, I'd say, to not be use too much language here, kind of attitude. And Jackson Merrill, just a bulldog, like, doesn't realize how young he is. So I do think they have the right dudes to overcome what they're going through right now. So we'll go down to the Giants here. And I'm going to throw it mostly to you here before I give more detail of my thoughts. But right off the bat, this is what I'm going to say. Love the Adames acquisition. Love that they're continuing to be aggressive. With that being said, I still look at this lineup, this rotation, the whole thing. I think it's better than it was a couple years ago. But without going into too much detail right away, it just doesn't jump off the page to me like, oh, this team's going to compete this year. I'm just not convinced they have enough yet.
Yeah, I mean, with the acquisition of Willy Adames, 7 years, $182 million, you and I spoke about this in depth, just about how these teams, the Giants and the Blue Jays, felt like they were desperate to secure that one big fish. And Adames was out there, and he had a great year last year. Maybe people have concerns about the ballpark fit with Adames, but that being said, he is going away probably the best hitter in that lineup. Looking at the lineup going forward, I mean, he's going to be slotted to bat number 2 there in the slot. Looks like Chapman's going to be batting cleanup for them. But the lineup does lack depth beyond the key acquisitions. And look at the rotation as well. Verlander, his age raises durability questions and concerns there. Of course, Logan Webb is slotted at the top. But they made some bold moves to remain competitive. And that's not competitive in the way where like we think that there's a shot for them to win this crown and be able to win the National League West and go away and have a magical season over by the Bay there. But I think they did enough to bring people to the ballpark with the beauty that is San Francisco. Yes. I think they have people a reason that you can believe in this team, some likable faces on that squad. I think Adames will be a fan favorite, but there are clear holes. And I think their offseason moves reflect that there is a desire to compete. There's always a desire to compete from this ownership team. The challenges do remain, but I think there's a realistic look through the lens of we're lagging behind even the top 3 teams. We mentioned the top 3 before. They're clearly a distant fourth between the Padres, the D-backs, and the Dodgers. And clearly midseason, we're going to be looking at them determining their approach. And I think similar to the Padres, there could be a world where they're light buyers in something that makes sense. And I don't think they're going to go change upheave everything they have planned, but they want to add a bat somewhere through in between. It's certainly not going to hurt because I mean, again, looking at their DH this year, Jahar and Encarnacion, like I mean, we're looking at a player that's unproven. I mean, I'm looking at what are you going to get from Mike Yastrzemski this year? Tyler Fitzgerald, an athletic freak. We saw him have a run last year. There's a lot of potential pop in this lineup, but a lot of consistency questions as well. So I'm just as skeptical as you, but I think that there'll be a reason to go and, grab a seat in the warm weather of San Francisco, sit by the bay, one of the best views in baseball, and watch this team play. Can Lamonte Wade be a great leadoff hitter for them? I mean, chances are probably not, but it's one of those things where as a Giants fan, you saw a lot of success, and I think they can withstand the process of knowing there is a path to get back to being competitive. You have to weather this storm that is this Dodger blue looming large in California.
Yeah, there's just some unknowns. We're gonna have to kind of wait and see. Like Willy Adames, what does he look like in San Francisco in that ballpark? Does he still look like that offensive force he did in Milwaukee? It's just a much different place. Maybe he does. I love the player. I love the whole makeup of the player, Willy Adames. Like I love it, and him kind of tag teaming with Chapman on that side of the infield. I think that could make Adames' defense better because you got that absolute stud there. And Chapman's looked great in spring training, like just hitting bombs. He's always been this streaky offensive player and just as steady as it gets on defense. So we'll see if he can put a whole 162 offensive force out there. That changes the team completely. Patrick Bailey's going to get the most out of his pitchers. That's one good thing to look at. You mentioned Verlander. The cool thing about Verlander is I almost see him as player coach at this point. Like they don't really need 30 starts from the dude. If he gives you 15 starts and kind of takes some of these younger guys under his wing, I think that's a plus. Hayden Birdsong is an interesting guy. If he can take the next step, he's showed signs of brilliance, but he has some things to iron out. Verlander might be the perfect guy to help him with that. Logan Webb, you know what you're going to get most likely. This guy is as durable as anyone in the game. He's going to be one of the only guys that most likely you can depend on 200 innings, and he's a hell of a pitcher to boot. Not just a guy that gives you innings. Like he's tough to hit. He's one of the only guys of his kind out there. Like he's just a different type of pitcher. Fun to watch. Robbie Ray. They got a lot of guys with tight pants on this team. Robbie Ray, Justin Verlander.
Tight pants. I mean, Verlander and Ray on the same team
it's egregious. Like it's
an egregious amount of tight pants. And Joey Lucchesi is on this team as the 6th starter potentially for this team slotted. He has some pretty damn tight pants as well, I think.
He might, but he probably will spend most of the time in the minors, but maybe he makes some starts similar to what he did for the Mets for the last couple of years. The guy I want to highlight before we move on to the Rockies is Jordan Hicks. The Giants looked like geniuses in April last year after acquiring him and saying that he was going to be a starter because he was always a bullpen guy, threw hard as hell. He started off great, 1.86 ERA in April last year and 29 innings pitched. So it wasn't like a small sample size there for a month. Threw another 29 and a third in May, and the ERA was 3.99, still not bad. And then things kind of started going south. He kind of hit a wall, which some people expected. 22 and a third innings in June, 5.24 ERA. Only 15 innings pitched in July, 8.4 ERA. And at some point, they transitioned him back to the bullpen. His desire, from what I've heard in spring, is he still wants to be a starter. They're going to give him that shot. He's added 15 pounds of muscle, apparently, trying to increase that durability. There's a lot of X factors on this team, but he's one that I'm very interested in because he has shown signs of being dominant. But we'll see what we get from Jordan Hicks. Speaking of pitchers and pitching and a place where not a lot of pitchers want to go, we got to talk about Colorado. There's not as much to talk about here. I think some of us are still looking more so at the future, like for a Zach Veen and a Chase Dollander, guys like that. When do they get here? What do they add? There's bright spots. Don't get me wrong. Brenton Doyle has become a favorite of mine. I know you mentioned him recently as being a favorite of yours as well. He's fun to watch. Ryan McMahon's been pretty steady at third base over there. Ezekiel Tovar is a guy, doubles machine, fun to watch too. It's just that this team falls off a cliff when they go on the road, and this has always been the story of the Colorado Rockies. They don't have much pitching to speak of, and I just don't see them having enough. One of the X factors I look at is a Nolan Jones, who absolutely tore it up in 2023 and then disappeared last year. They're going to need to get him back to that high level if they want any chance of winning some more games.
Yeah, and I think the biggest question mark, of course, among many is there's a lack of clear direction of their recent struggles representing something in the future. And like you mentioned some of the names, Chase Dollander, Charlie Condon, Brenton Doyle, being excited for the players that are coming up from underneath. But it feels like there is a lack of direction for the team. And I'm not sure if the pulse of that is because I'm far away from it, but maybe people closer can clarify. But it feels like watching their offseason lack significant moves. I mean, I don't think they had anything that was of substance at all. I mean, maybe it was just light moves that you can just like track on MLB trade rumors quick. They are continued to be in a rebuilding phase. And the frustrating part is there's no end in sight. And I think that's, to me, the most troubling thing about this, especially with a team that you can build so clearly to your ballpark. And I understand easier said than done. They are essentially a small market team. They are the fourth team in the market, I would imagine, for the, looking at popularity of the teams in the Denver market. They're behind some college teams, if we're being honest, as far as popularity goes. But there is a desire. There is a clamoring of the fan base that when they're good, we watched in 07 when they made that magical run to a World Series and ultimately got completely lambasted by the Red Sox. Different story, different time. There is a love affair with the Colorado and their Rockies. And I would rather just see where the path is, because a lot of these teams that are rebuilding, the frustrating part to watch from afar is not knowing where they're at on the loading screen of like, where are they? Are they 13% ready to go? Are they 50%? Are they 75%? With the Rockies, it feels like they're stuck at go when the gun goes off in the race. Where are they on the line here? So they're clearly sellers aiming to acquire assets for future competitiveness. If, there are some bright spots on this team, if someone wants to pick up Chris Bryant and his contract, if he gets off to a hot start,
stay on the field. He's got to stay on the field
for sure. And there is, a world where you look at this team and recognize a Nolan Jones, as you mentioned before. If is he going to be part of this equation? If, if you identify that you're going to be competitive in a realistic way, where you don't want to say it out loud in front of a press conference on Denver TV, but if you have a realistic conversation in-house with people on board, when are we going to be good? What year will that be? Is it 2035? Is it 2031? Is it 2029? We need to have a realistic thing. And you got to look at this projected lineup for 2025 and say, who's going to be a part of that equation? So, looking at everything all told here, we want to look at long-term development. We want to watch the development of a Brenton Doyle and see what happens here. But again, the frustrating part to me continues to be, it's so clear what you need to do to have an advantage at home, because Coors Field can be an advantage. Everyone looks at it as a disadvantage playing on this field, but you have the ability to play your offensive games there more than anybody else. And for these pitchers, it's hard to get them there. This has been the story since they came into the league in 1993. It's nothing new here. And their pitchers are going to be beat the hell up. Their projected ERAs are, astronomical. But there is a world where you can develop a lineup and slug people to death. I mean, they don't have to spend all this money. There's a lot of viable bats out there that were really affordable that the Rockies could have went out there and spent some money, and they did nothing.
No, nothing. They stood pat there. I mean, I'm looking at roster resource on Fangraphs. I mean, the rotation, man, starting pitcher 1 to 5, German Marquez, Ryan Feltner, Kyle Freeland, and Antonio Senzatella, Bradley Blaylock. I mean, Austin Gumber might be hurt. I mean, listen, Marquez has had past success, but has been on and off the field for the last few years. Kyle Freeland at times has looked great, and then at times has looked like he doesn't belong in the majors. I don't know if they even have much to give at the deadline, but if you're a Rocky fan, you got to be looking at the future. You're looking at the Drew Romos of the world, right? He's another guy we should mention as a talented catcher. Brenton Doyle has obviously been here. Hopefully Nolan Jones can find himself again. And if we get Chase Dollander up here at some point, maybe we see something. Chris Bryant, man, he's another guy, we don't talk about him much, but it's so strange. He went from that Cubs team that finally broke the curse to then signing in anonymity in Colorado, and now just never can get on the field. He's still a talented player, obviously, but needs to stay on the field to kind of get his worth back, as far as if they're looking at other teams that might want these pieces. So let's do this. We ran down all 5 teams. We talked a little bit about their offseason. We talked about what we think they might do at the deadline. At this point, I think it's time to talk about a few things. Our predictions as far as who's going to win, and maybe the standings 1 through 5. How many teams we think are going to make the playoffs, and who those playoff teams will be. And I think we also are going to try to name one X factor. We kind of rattled through a few for each team. But if we had to pick one or two guys that are going to affect the division outcome the most, we're going to try to name that as well. So I'll start here with my AL West predictions, NL West predictions 1 through 5. I think it's obvious from what we said before that both of us are probably going to have this at the top. I have the Dodgers to win the division. I have the Diamondbacks to be second. And I think there is a real question, Diamondbacks or Padres. I think that's a debate, a healthy one too. And the reason I'm going to the Diamondbacks, I think they have a chip on their shoulder from last year, missing it, coming up short. I think Corbin Carroll's going to be healthier, feel better. I think the rotation is better. And Zach Gallen contract year. I think the Padres, there's just more questions with where they're headed. I think they're a great team still. I think they're very dangerous in the National League. Going to be a hard team to play against. I just wonder about those ownership questions and where they really are going to go. Giants 4th and Rockies 5th. And my playoff teams, and then I'll turn it over to you before we name our X factors. I think 2 teams make the playoffs. They come out of the West, and I think it's just the Dodgers and D-backs. I think the Padres end up falling a little bit short. If they get off to a very hot start, like I said, I hope they do. I think that changes my opinion a little bit, but I think they're gonna need that. So give me your predictions here, 1 through 5.
Well, for the sake of potting, I wish I could disagree, but I have exactly what you have here. Same 2 playoff teams and straight 1 through 5. Every team in there is the teams I think are going to be falling there. And same with the D-backs and Padres. I think that's the tightest race in between. But I mentioned as we were previewing them, the jump off from the Dodgers to the D-backs is pretty extreme. And then from the D-backs down to the Padres or the Giants, I feel like that's even extreme as well. And then even from the Giants to the Rockies, huge extreme drop off as well from the talent. I think that there will be a lot of fun matchups inside this division. The games with the Giants and the Dodgers still has that buzz. It's
Dodgers Padres must watch
100%. And it's the West Coast version of Yankees Red Sox, what it was in its heyday in the early 2000s, late 90s, etc. And I think no matter what, they bring the noise there. And I think the Giants did just enough to be formidable and potentially go out there and try to win a season series against the Dodgers. And I understand this is a proud franchise with championship pedigree, and they're not going to rest on their laurels of saying that's the benchmark. But if they can go out there and be a pest for the Dodgers and impact their seeding or go out there and just embarrass them on some nights, there will be nights where the Giants go out there and slug them to death. They're going to probably beat the hell out of Roki Sasaki at some moment. There's going to be a lot of Tyler Fitzgerald doing what he does and hitting the ball a million miles over the fence from a Roki or from a Blake Snell. And there's a lot of good interior storylines to make a fan feel like, let me pop on my Giants hat or my D-backs hat and root so hard against the Dodgers. So there is always the case of like we mentioned before, my prediction for the division winner is the Dodgers. I think they're poised to continue their dominance, secure the NL West title in 2025, but that's not to say everything else is still not in question. You know what I mean? There's still so many things that could fall into place to make this a very, very interesting 2025 campaign for all these teams. Really, aside from the Rockies, I understand we ran them down pretty hard, but it's almost deservedly so because they went out there and they punted on an offseason in an embarrassing way. I would like a team like that. And maybe they feel like they were burned because we mentioned before the contract, Chris Bryant, they did what they did and tried their best to be competitive. They swung at a free agent and they missed, and now they're a little gun shy. But with this ballpark, Coors Field, you have an ability to build a team around, and I want to see them be a little bit more forward with that come 2026.
Yeah, I think everyone would like to. I mean, I will say, like, one thing I heard is like the Mets, the amount of people that came to the Mets games, the attendance was a little disappointing. I think they were like 18th best. Apparently, the Rockies beat us, so like they're still showing up. It's a great atmosphere out there at Coors. One place I'd like to get to soon. I know you've been, but I just want to get back very quickly before I give you my X factor. Padres Dodgers, man, I can't wait to see what that dynamic is. They have this weird thing. It's been chippy between them for a while, but this weird dynamic where like Dave Roberts came out and admitted he was playing mind games with Manny Machado, who was a former player of his for half a year. And I know Machado doesn't appreciate that, and Manny doesn't. He's not shy about going at somebody, right? But then the Dodgers also like praised the Padres, continued like after they won the World Series, kept on talking about the Padres, saying they're the best team in the league, and once we beat them, we knew we were going to win everything. Meanwhile, they like completely shit on the Yankees, the actual team they played against in the World Series.
Yep.
But made note, I feel like it's more mind games, like just kind of bringing the Padres up. I don't know. It's a weird thing, so I'm looking forward to that. But to get to my X factor here, this is related to the Diamondbacks, saying that I think they're the most, like I said before, I think they're the team that can be a thorn in the side of the Dodgers. They're not going to get involved in the mind games. They're just a bunch of baseball players. And I think for them to do what I think they can do and finish second in that division and get a playoff spot and maybe challenge the Dodgers a little bit, I think it's going to be the Corbins, Corbin Carroll, Corbin Burnes. Those two are going to have to deliver all season long. We're going to need Burnes to be the ace that he is advertised as being, Cy Young type of year. And we're going to need Corbin Carroll full year, looking good all year. No streakiness, no slow starts. He needs to get out of the gate hot right away. Those are my X factors right there.
My X factor, of course, you could look at the singular force that is Shohei Ohtani, that this dual threat capabilities, all that. But I think the Dodgers probably, with Shohei getting hurt and being out, God forbid, all year, the Dodgers still probably the favorite in this division. That's just showing how strong they are. So my X factor is Cease and Michael King. And I think that will determine what goes on in the future of this division. I think if the Dodgers, if the Padres, like you mentioned before, get up to a really hot start, it could really change the way things are structured out here. It could affect other divisions as well, as I mentioned, with the Baltimore Orioles being out there potentially as a recipient of a Dylan Cease deal. If the Padres fall off, there's a lot of ripple effect. So it's not just for the X factor in the divisions, the X factor for the league about how King and Cease, and if there is a world where, like you mentioned before, there is this 15-2 start for the Padres, that they look at this and say, we can go on a magic carpet ride and go all the way straight through. It could shift things if they're deciding not to move on from Cease in the middle of this season, and maybe they go out and they spend the money on other play. Like it's a whole dynamic of, thinking big picture with not just the National League West, but the league at large. So they're my two X factors. But of course, the singular player that everyone's going to be watching year in, year out. I mean, there's been a graphic at the bottom of every screen for how long, how many days until a Shohei Ohtani at bat. So he is going to heavily influence not just the Dodgers' success and popularity, but the league at large. And whether people like it or not, he's the face of the league. So he's definitely going to shift dynamics of popularity and sell some jerseys, spike some ratings, etc. So Ohtani deserves some love in that regard as well.
Let's end it on this. I'm gonna pose a question to you, and it's a tricky one because there's a lot of guys you could go with in this division. If Shohei Ohtani is not the National League MVP, but another player from the NL West wins it, and it still could be on the Dodgers, who's that guy?
Corbin Carroll.
Okay, I'm gonna go Fernando Tatis Jr. just because I think, like I said earlier, if the Padres are gonna make the noise that San Diego fans want them to make, I think it's got to be a all-time year for Tatis.
So we appreciate you guys listening to our first preview of many. Like we said, we'll be dropping an episode every single day this week. Tomorrow we'll be dropping an American League West preview, talking all the storylines that we preview with Jared Sandler about the Texas Rangers, but all the teams at large. We're going to be definitely talking about Mike Trout and his return to dominance. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that we're going to see a Mike Trout reunion with some success and some health. A lot of good stuff on the horizon. Then we're going to move through these divisions as we continue to go through. You can follow us at TableSetters Pod on X and also on Instagram for all the updates on the schedule. Trying to keep these episodes a little bit compact. I know Devin put a poll out there for our most ideal episodes for people that like long form or short
Very
form.
split.
And it seems like
very split.
There's more questions than answers in that regard, right, Devin?
Yeah. It was a little bit of everything. So that's kind of what we thought. Everyone's a little bit different. But if it's too long for your normal taste, you just hit that 1 times button and move it up to like 1.5, and you got your time that you want.
Absolutely. So we'll be back tomorrow talking all things American League West. Let us know your thoughts about the National League West if you vehemently disagree, and let us know where we were wrong. Drop it in the comments and let us know what you can do. And also leave a 5-star review if you can. There's been a lot of good interaction on social media with us, but the way we find other people and other people's ears is through reviews and climbing up the algorithm. And the first way to do that is leaving a 5-star review and also sharing with somebody out there as the baseball season kicks off. That's the one thing you can do to help us if you really appreciate the effort we're putting in here.
Yeah, man. 5-star reviews. We'll take all the 5-star reviews we can get. Absolutely.
So we'll be back tomorrow talking all things American League West, and we'll talk to you after a while.